Matt had always been curious about his family's past. As a paranormal investigator, he spent most of his time chasing stories of haunted places, strange occurrences, and eerie urban legends. But there was one story he had yet to investigate, one that had haunted his own family for generations. It was the tale of his great-aunt Alice and the shadow with the green eyes. The house still stood on the outskirts of Lebanon, an old stone structure surrounded by cedar trees, their branches whispering secrets in the wind. Abandoned for decades, it was a place that his family rarely spoke about. But Matt had grown up with bits and pieces of the story, how his great-grandfather had died trying to save Alice from something unseen, something that left a permanent scar on her mind. The moment he stepped out of the car, the air felt heavy. The sun was setting, and long shadows stretched across the yard like fingers reaching for the house. Matt stood at the entrance, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on him. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a darkened hallway covered in dust and cobwebs. He could almost hear the echoes of the past, footsteps from another time, faint voices whispering in the corners. As he explored, he found remnants of his family's life, old furniture covered in sheets, photographs fading in their frames, and an ancient mirror leaning against the wall. It was all as if the house had been frozen in time, waiting for him. But something was off. The deeper he ventured into the house, the colder the air became. The light from his flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. At the end of the hallway, he noticed a door, slightly ajar, with a crack just wide enough to see into the room beyond. Matt hesitated. He knew the story, he knew this was the room where Alice had seen it, the shadow with the green eyes. He pushed the door open and felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped inside. The room was empty, save for an old rocking chair that swayed gently as if it had just been disturbed. His flashlight flickered again, and for a brief moment, he saw it, a shadow in the corner, eyes glowing a faint green. He blinked, and it was gone. But the sense of unease lingered. Matt felt as though he was being watched, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He raised his camera, determined to capture whatever was there. Just as he clicked, the temperature dropped, and the flashlight died, plunging the room into darkness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the creak of the floorboards as Matt tried to steady his breathing. Then, from the shadows, came a whisper, soft, almost like a breath against his ear. "Why did you come back?" Matt spun around, but there was no one there. The room remained empty, but he could feel a presence, something ancient, something waiting. He stumbled out of the room, his heart racing as he slammed the door behind him. As he leaned against the wall, trying to collect his thoughts, he noticed a photograph on the floor. It was of Alice, smiling innocently. But in the background, in the same corner where he had seen the shadow, there were two glowing green eyes staring back at the camera. Matt struggled to steady his breath as he stared at the photograph in his hands. The eyes in the picture were unmistakable, green, piercing, and watching. He felt the room grow colder, the air almost electric with tension. Whatever presence haunted this house, it was aware of him. It had been waiting. He pulled out his phone, taking a picture of the photo before slipping it into his backpack. His instincts told him that there was more to uncover, and he needed every clue he could find. He knew that leaving the house wasn't an option, he had come too far. With a deep breath, he switched on a secondary flashlight, casting a beam that cut through the thick shadows as he made his way down the corridor. Every step felt heavier than the last. The walls seemed to whisper, a faint and incomprehensible murmur that echoed through the house. It was as if the structure itself was alive, groaning with the weight of decades of secrets. Matt reached the staircase leading to the upper floor, where his gray-tant's bedroom had been. Each creak of the wooden steps felt like a heartbeat echoing in his ears. At the top of the stairs, he found a narrow hallway lined with closed doors. He hesitated, feeling the temperature drop even further. The air was so cold he could see his breath. As he moved forward, he noticed the door at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar, a faint green glow seeping through the crack. With a trembling hand, he pushed it open. The room beyond was small, almost claustrophobic. A single window allowed a sliver of moonlight to spill in, casting eerie patterns on the floor. But what caught his eye was the journal lying on the bed, its pages yellowed with age. It was Alice's. Matt's fingers brushed the cover, and a shiver ran down his spine. The air felt charged, as if something was waiting for him to open it. As he flipped through the pages, he saw entries filled with childish handwriting, innocent recollections of daily life. But as he turned the pages, the tone changed. The words became frantic, the handwriting more erratic. One entry caught his attention: "I keep seeing the eyes. They watch me from the corner, even when I close my eyes. Daddy says it's just a shadow, but I know it's more. It whispers my name." A chill ran through Matt as he read the words. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the house itself was reacting to his presence. Suddenly, he heard a soft creak behind him. He turned, flashlight in hand, and saw the door slowly closing on its own. His pulse quickened. Just as the door clicked shut, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Matt's hand scrambled to find his phone, and as he fumbled with it, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. His heart pounded as he tried to remain calm, but the whisper that followed sent a chill down his spine. "Leave, before it's too late." Matt spun around, but the room was empty. His phone screen finally illuminated, casting a dim light. He aimed it around the room, desperately searching for any sign of movement. That's when he saw them, green eyes glowing from the corner, hovering above the ground, watching him. In that moment, everything felt still. The whispering grew louder, almost as if the house itself was speaking to him. Matt stumbled back, grabbing the journal as he made his way to the door. He yanked it open and rushed down the stairs, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Reaching the entrance, he paused to catch his breath, clutching the journal tightly. The cold seemed to follow him, wrapping around him like a shroud. As he looked back at the dark hallway, the green eyes appeared again, watching him from the shadows. He could feel the weight of their gaze, like a physical pressure, pushing him out. He stepped outside, the cold night air feeling almost warm in comparison. But the sense of dread didn't leave. As he walked to his car, he glanced up at the window of the room he had just escaped. There, in the darkness, the green eyes stared back, unblinking. Matt knew then that he hadn't escaped. Whatever haunted the house was now following him, and he had only just begun to uncover its curse. The drive back from the old house felt like a blur. Matt's mind was racing, replaying the events of the night. He couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes, green, unblinking, and relentless. The journal he had taken from the house sat on the passenger seat, and every time he glanced at it, he felt a chill run through him. What was in those pages that had been hidden for so long? What had Alice seen, and why had it followed him? As he pulled into the driveway of his apartment, Matt noticed the street lights flickering. The air outside was colder than usual, and a thick fog was beginning to settle in. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him. He needed to review the footage he had captured at the house, and, more importantly, he needed to go through Alice's journal in detail. He set up his camera and laptop on the desk, transferring the video files. The screen showed the familiar view of the house's hallway, the door opening to the room with the green glow. He fast-forwarded, scanning for any movement or anomalies. That's when he saw it, a brief flicker in the corner of the frame. Rewinding, he paused the video. The shadow was there. Its form was indistinct, almost like smoke, but the eyes were clear. They glowed bright green, piercing through the screen. Matt felt his breath catch as he watched the shadow move, almost as if it were aware it was being recorded. It hovered in the corner, then vanished in a blink. He leaned back in his chair, trying to rationalize what he saw. But no amount of logic could explain the fear creeping up his spine. He glanced at the journal, feeling a pull to open it again. Flipping through the pages, he found entries that described shadows, whispers, and cold sensations, exactly like what he had experienced. But as he read further, the descriptions became more disturbing. "It knows when I'm alone," Alice wrote. "It waits until I think I'm safe. Then, it whispers. It says it will take everything from me." A sudden crash echoed from the kitchen, jolting Matt out of his thoughts. His heart raced as he stood, the apartment suddenly feeling much smaller. He grabbed his flashlight and slowly made his way to the kitchen, the beam cutting through the darkness. The air was icy, his breath visible in the light. As he approached, he saw that one of the cabinets was open, its contents spilled across the floor. The lights flickered again, and in the corner of the room, he saw it, those same green eyes, watching him from the shadows. Matt froze, his pulse pounding in his ears. The shadow moved, shifting closer. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, paralyzed by fear. The whisper returned, clearer this time, as if the entity were standing right next to him. "You should have left it alone." He stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The room went dark, and in the silence, he could hear his own ragged breathing. He fumbled for the switch, flooding the room with light. But the shadow was gone. Only the cold remained. Shaken, Matt returned to his desk, gripping the journal tightly. He had to know more. He continued reading, and the further he went, the more he realized that this wasn't just about Alice, it was about anyone who crossed paths with the entity. The journal spoke of curses, of people who had seen the shadow and soon fell ill or met tragic fates. The eyes marked those they watched, binding them to a curse that reached beyond death. Desperation filled him as he flipped to the final pages. "I can feel it growing stronger," Alice wrote. "It wants me to stay. It wants my soul." The last entry was nothing but a scribbled, frantic message, "Don't come back." As he closed the journal, the apartment lights flickered, and the temperature dropped once again. Matt felt the familiar chill wash over him, but this time, he knew there was no escaping it. The eyes were already here, and they wouldn't leave until they had taken what they wanted. He grabbed his camera, determined to document everything. If he was going to face this entity, he would make sure the world knew the truth. He aimed the lens around the room, focusing on every shadow. The camera screen flickered, and for a moment, he saw them, those green eyes, staring back from behind his reflection in the window. Matt couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt hostile. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward him, every flicker of light threatened to plunge him into darkness. The green eyes, once confined to the abandoned house, now seemed to follow him wherever he went. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see flashes of those eyes, glowing, unblinking, pulling him deeper into a void. His reflection, once familiar, now felt like a stranger watching him. He couldn't tell if he was imagining things, but the whispering voices grew louder, echoing in his mind. He knew he had to do something, anything, to break the curse. Matt began researching ancient texts and folklore, desperate to find a way to rid himself of the entity. He pored over old manuscripts and digital archives, cross-referencing every mention of Djinn he could find. The journal entries from his great-aunt had warned him about the curse, but they offered no solution. He was running out of options. One night, as he scrolled through an old Arabic text, he came across a ritual, a way to banish a Djinn back to the realm it came from. It required a personal belonging from the entity's victim and a fire, symbolic of the smokeless fire that Djinn are said to be created from. Matt knew it was a risk, but he was out of time. The shadows had already started creeping into his life, and he felt their grip tightening. He prepared for the ritual, gathering the items he needed. The only personal belonging he had from Alice was the journal. If the Djinn had marked her, perhaps using the journal could break the connection. He set up the ritual in his living room, lighting candles and placing the journal in the center. The flickering flames cast long shadows on the walls, and the temperature dropped as he began to chant the incantation he had memorized. At first, nothing happened. The flames danced, and the shadows remained still. But as Matt continued, he felt a shift in the air. The shadows around him began to twist, merging into one dark mass that hovered above the journal. The green eyes appeared once more, glaring at him with a hatred he could feel in his bones. The whispering grew louder, the words almost deafening. "You cannot escape me." The entity's voice echoed through the room, vibrating in his skull. Matt's hand shook, but he pressed on, reciting the incantation louder, determined to end it. The room grew colder, and the flames began to flicker violently. The shadow loomed closer, the green eyes fixed on Matt as it reached out, tendrils of darkness creeping toward him. Matt felt his body grow numb as the cold enveloped him, the air so frigid it felt like it was slicing through his skin. He screamed the final words of the incantation, throwing salt into the flames. The fire flared, casting a blinding light that illuminated the entire room. The shadow recoiled, its form distorting as it let out an inhuman shriek. The green eyes flickered, and for a moment, Matt thought he had succeeded. But then, the flames extinguished, and the room plunged into darkness. The silence was suffocating. Matt's heart raced as he fumbled for his flashlight. When the beam finally cut through the darkness, he saw that the journal was gone, replaced by a blackened, scorched mark on the floor. The green eyes reappeared, this time hovering inches from his face. The whisper came again, but now it was cold and mocking. "Did you really think you could banish me?" Matt stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from his grip. The room seemed to close in around him, the shadows merging into one entity that filled the space. He felt the cold tendrils wrap around his arms, pulling him down. The whisper became a roar, a cacophony of voices echoing in his ears. Just as he felt himself slipping into the darkness, his phone buzzed, the vibration pulling him back to reality. He reached for it, his hands shaking. The screen showed a message from an unknown number. It was a single line. "Leave now, before it claims your soul." Matt bolted out of the apartment, his heart pounding as he raced down the stairs and into the street. The fog outside was thicker than before, swallowing the streetlights and shrouding everything in a cold, suffocating mist. He could still feel the entity's presence, lingering, watching him from the shadows. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. As he sat there, catching his breath, he glanced back at his apartment window. There, in the darkness, were the green eyes, waiting. He knew he couldn't stay. The entity had marked him, and as long as he remained in its grasp, it would continue to torment him. His only option was to find the source of the curse and destroy it once and for all. But first, he needed to understand what he was truly dealing with. The ritual had failed, but it had given him one clue: the journal wasn't the key. There was something else, something deeper tying him to the entity. As he drove into the night, the fog swallowing the road ahead, he knew he had to return to the one place he swore he wouldn't, the old family house. It was there that the curse had begun, and it was there that he would find the answers he needed. The road back to the family house felt longer this time, as if the fog itself was conspiring to keep Matt away. His headlights barely pierced the mist, and the silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of the trees lining the road. The air was heavy, and every nerve in his body screamed that he was heading straight into a trap. But he knew there was no other choice. If he wanted to rid himself of the Djinn's curse, he needed to go back to where it all began. The house loomed ahead, its shadow stretching across the yard like a claw. Matt parked the car and stepped out, feeling the cold embrace of the night as he approached the front door. It creaked open as he pushed, almost as if the house had been expecting him. Inside, the temperature dropped even further, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. He could see his breath in the faint beam of his flashlight. The hallway, covered in dust and cobwebs, looked the same as when he had last left it. But this time, the shadows felt different, more alive, more hostile. He made his way to the room where he had seen the eyes, but it was empty, as if nothing had ever happened. The rocking chair stood still, and the corners of the room remained shrouded in darkness. Matt's grip tightened on his flashlight as he scanned the space, the beam flickering. Something was wrong. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Matt's heart leapt into his throat, and he hesitated. Every instinct told him to run, to get out while he still could. But he forced himself to move, taking slow, measured steps toward the staircase. Each creak of the wood beneath his feet felt like the beat of a drum, growing louder as he climbed. At the top of the stairs, he saw it, a door at the end of the hallway, wide open. A faint green glow pulsed from within, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Matt's pulse quickened. He knew this was it, the heart of the curse. He approached the door cautiously, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As he stepped into the room, he felt a sudden chill. The air was frigid, and the green glow illuminated the walls, revealing symbols and markings he hadn't seen before, ancient sigils that pulsed with a faint energy. The room felt alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing. In the center of the room, a large mirror stood propped against the wall. Its surface was dark, reflecting the green light in a way that made the glass appear like a pool of water. Matt's breath hitched as he saw his own reflection. But there was something wrong. His eyes, staring back, glowed green. The realization hit him like a wave. The Djinn had marked him, and now it was using him as a vessel. As he stepped closer to the mirror, his reflection began to move on its own, smirking as its eyes flickered with that all-too-familiar glow. The whispers filled the room, louder now, echoing in a language Matt couldn't understand. He backed away, feeling the cold grip of fear tighten around his chest. The shadows in the room began to stretch and twist, merging into a single mass that hovered behind the mirror. The eyes, bright and malicious, locked onto his as the entity's form solidified. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a figure, tall and imposing, its features obscured except for the eyes that blazed with an unnatural light. Matt knew he had one last chance. He pulled a vial of salt from his pocket and began spreading it across the doorway, creating a barrier. The entity hissed, its form rippling as it recoiled from the salt. But it wasn't enough. The whispers grew into a roar, shaking the walls as the sigils on the wall began to glow brighter. The mirror surface shimmered, and Matt saw the room beyond it, a twisted, distorted version of the room he stood in. The figure in the mirror stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass. He realized then that the mirror was a gateway, a portal to the Djinn's world. If he could destroy it, maybe he could seal the entity away. With one swift motion, Matt grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and swung it at the mirror. The glass shattered, shards flying in all directions. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the room exploded in a burst of energy. The shadows screamed as they were pulled back into the broken mirror, the green eyes disappearing one by one. The force knocked Matt off his feet, and he hit the ground hard. The light from his flashlight spun, casting wild, disorienting shadows across the walls. He could feel the cold retreating, the air growing warmer as the energy from the shattered mirror dissipated. He lay there, breathing heavily, as the house fell silent once more. The green glow was gone, and the oppressive cold had lifted. Matt pulled himself up, looking around the room. The mirror lay in pieces, and the sigils on the walls had faded. It was over, or so he thought. As he made his way back down the stairs, he felt a chill run down his spine. The whispers, once a distant echo, returned, faint but unmistakable. "It's not that easy to escape." Matt froze, his hand gripping the railing. The cold returned, creeping up his arm as he realized that destroying the mirror had only bought him time. The Djinn wasn't gone, it had simply been banished to another part of the house, waiting for its next opportunity. He rushed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. As he reached his car, he looked back one last time. In the window, high above, the green eyes watched, unblinking. Matt knew he would have to find another way to break the curse, something deeper, something that wouldn't just trap the Djinn, but destroy it once and for all. But for now, he had escaped with his life, and he wasn't about to waste it. He started the car, driving into the night with the whispers fading into the distance. This was far from over, but he was determined to survive, no matter what it took. Matt drove through the night, the fog and darkness swallowing the road ahead. His mind raced, replaying the events at the old house. The shattered mirror, the ancient symbols, the whispers, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle he had yet to solve. He knew the Djinn was still out there, watching, waiting for its next move. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about understanding the entity's true nature and finding a way to destroy it once and for all. He pulled into a small roadside diner just before dawn, the first light of day barely piercing the heavy mist. The place was quiet, nearly empty. As he sat down, he pulled out his laptop and opened the digital archives he had been researching. There had to be something he had missed, some clue about the nature of the curse or a way to banish the Djinn permanently. As he scrolled through ancient texts and folklore from different cultures, one story caught his attention. It was an account of a village in the Middle East that had suffered a similar curse centuries ago. According to the legend, a Djinn had terrorized the villagers, marking them one by one. The only way they had managed to break the curse was by finding the object that had bound the Djinn to their world, a talisman hidden within the place it had first appeared. They had destroyed it in a sacred fire, severing the connection and trapping the entity forever. Matt's pulse quickened. If the story was true, then the Djinn that haunted his family must have a similar anchor, something hidden in the house, connecting it to their world. Destroying the mirror hadn't been enough, it was merely a portal. The real talisman, the true source of the curse, was still hidden. Determined, Matt left the diner and headed back to the old house. The fog was lifting as he parked, the sun casting long shadows across the property. The house looked even more ominous in the daylight, its windows like empty eyes staring back at him. But he had no choice, he had to go back inside. He stepped through the doorway, the familiar chill settling over him. The air felt heavy, and the silence was absolute. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a distant whisper. Matt retraced his steps, making his way back up the staircase to the room where the mirror had shattered. The shards of glass still lay scattered on the floor, and the symbols on the walls had faded, but he knew there was more to uncover. He began searching the room methodically, examining every corner, every loose floorboard, and every inch of the wall. His flashlight flickered as he worked, casting eerie shadows that danced with each movement. As he pried open a floorboard near the corner where he had first seen the eyes, he felt a rush of cold air escape from below. Beneath the floorboard was a small compartment. His hands trembled as he reached in, feeling something cold and metallic. He pulled it out, a small, ornate box covered in intricate carvings. It was old, much older than the house itself, and as he held it, he felt the familiar chill intensify. He knew immediately that this was it. The box was the anchor, the object binding the Djinn to his family. He had to destroy it, but he needed to be careful. The Djinn would not let him do so easily. Matt hurried downstairs, clutching the box tightly. He set up a makeshift altar in the center of the living room, surrounding it with salt and lighting a circle of candles. As he opened the box, he found a small amulet inside, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The air grew colder, and the shadows around him began to shift. He grabbed the amulet and held it over the flames. The moment it touched the fire, the room erupted in a deafening roar. The walls shook, and the air filled with the shrieking of the Djinn, its form materializing from the shadows, eyes blazing with rage. The entity lunged at him, but the salt barrier held it back, the flames flickering as they resisted its advance. Matt focused, chanting the incantation he had memorized. The amulet glowed brighter as the fire consumed it, and the Djinn screamed, its form distorting as it clawed at the barrier. The room felt like it was closing in, the shadows reaching out to extinguish the flames. As Matt recited the final words, the amulet cracked, releasing a burst of energy that sent a shockwave through the room. The Djinn's form shattered, its green eyes fading into darkness as it was pulled into the flames. The fire roared, consuming the talisman and sealing the curse. The walls of the house trembled one last time before falling silent. Matt stood there, breathless, as the air warmed and the oppressive cold lifted. The shadows receded, and the house felt still. He had done it, he had broken the curse. The Djinn was gone, trapped forever in the flames that had consumed its anchor. He walked out of the house, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. The fog had cleared, and the sun shone brightly overhead. For the first time in days, he felt at peace. As he looked back at the house, he knew it was over. The entity that had haunted his family for generations was finally gone. Or so he thought. As Matt drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he saw them, two faint green eyes staring back from the shadows of the back seat. He blinked, and they were gone, leaving only the empty reflection of the road behind. The whispers, now a distant echo, lingered in his mind. It's never over. The drive back to the city felt endless. Every mile Matt covered seemed to stretch longer, the fog thickening despite the dawn breaking above. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes flicking back to the rearview mirror where, just minutes earlier, he had seen the green eyes. They were gone now, but the dread lingered. The Djinn wasn't finished with him. As he pulled into his apartment parking lot, the air was thick and cold, an unnatural chill for the early morning. Matt hesitated before getting out of the car, scanning the empty lot for any signs of movement. The whispers that had haunted him were silent, but he knew that was no sign of safety. If anything, it meant the Djinn was waiting, watching, plotting its next move. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, the creak of each step echoing in the silence. As he unlocked the door, he felt a cold gust of air rush past him. The door swung open, and the apartment felt different, wrong. The shadows inside were darker, deeper than they should have been. His breath puffed out in clouds as he stepped inside, each exhale forming mist in the cold air. Matt knew he had only one option left. The ancient texts he had read mentioned a final ritual, a desperate measure to sever the connection between a Djinn and its victim. It was dangerous, a last-ditch effort that involved facing the entity head-on. But he was out of time. He gathered the remaining materials, salt, candles, and the last fragments of the broken mirror from the old house. As he set up the ritual circle in the middle of his living room, the air grew colder. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. He lit the candles, their flames struggling against the chill. He began the incantation, his voice steady but his heart racing. The shadows thickened, merging into a single mass that pooled in the corner of the room. The green eyes appeared, piercing through the darkness as the Djinn took shape, towering over him. It no longer looked like a simple shadow, its form was monstrous, a twisting mass of darkness and green flames. The whispers returned, louder this time, their voices blending into a cacophony that echoed through the apartment. You belong to me now. You cannot escape. Matt continued chanting, holding his ground. The flames of the candles flickered wildly as the Djinn advanced, the salt circle the only barrier holding it back. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows clawed at the edges of the circle, trying to break through. He reached for the mirror shard, holding it up as he recited the final words of the incantation. The shard began to glow, absorbing the energy from the Djinn as its form distorted, writhing against the pull. The entity screamed, the sound piercing and unnatural, like metal scraping against metal. Matt felt the pressure in the room increase, as if the very air was trying to crush him. The green eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, he felt his will falter. The whispers invaded his mind, pulling at his thoughts, trying to make him drop the mirror. You cannot destroy me. I have been with your family for centuries. You are mine. but Matt's resolve hardened. He pushed the shard deeper into the flame, and the Djinn's form began to fracture. The shadows split apart, the eyes flickering as the entity's power waned. With a final cry, Matt shouted the last words of the ritual, the shard bursting into light. The room was filled with a blinding flash, and the Djinn's form shattered, pieces of shadow scattering like ash in the wind. The green eyes faded, and the whispering ceased. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was silence. Matt collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily. The air warmed, and the shadows receded, leaving the apartment bathed in the soft glow of the morning light. He stayed there for a moment, feeling the relief wash over him. It was over. The Djinn was gone. But as he stood, he felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced around the apartment, the silence now feeling suffocating. The broken mirror pieces lay scattered on the floor, their reflections catching the light. In one shard, he saw his own face, his eyes glowing faintly green. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The whispers, faint but unmistakable, returned. You cannot escape your fate. The curse is bound to your blood. The realization hit him like a wave. He hadn't destroyed the Djinn. It had transferred its essence into him, binding its curse to his very soul. Matt felt a cold dread settle in his chest as he stared at his reflection. The entity was still there, hiding within, waiting. He grabbed his phone, recording a final message. If you're watching this, the curse is not over. It's in me now. If anything happens, destroy everything. Don't let it spread. As he finished recording, the lights flickered, and the cold returned. The green eyes stared back at him from every reflective surface in the room. He knew the fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. The Djinn was part of him now, and it would take everything he had to resist its pull. Matt walked to the window, looking out at the fog that had returned, thick and impenetrable. Somewhere out there, the whispers called, promising an endless pursuit. He clenched his fists, steeling himself for the fight ahead. The green eyes, always watching, burned bright in the reflection.
If this story sent shivers down your spine, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Scary Stories to You for more chilling tales from the darkest corners of the supernatural world. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update when a new story drops. And remember, the shadows aren't just watching, they're waiting. If you're brave enough, check out our next episode, where we dive into another terrifying encounter that will keep you up at night. Stay safe, and keep the lights on, you never know what might be lurking in the dark.